President Trump is once again intensifying his calls for interest rate cuts while lobbing insults at the source of his frustration, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. This week, he again mulled over the idea of firing Powell due to his frustrations that the Fed has not lowered rates, saying the decision is costing the country hundreds of billions of dollars. But the Fed has been cautious in part because it's assessing the impact of Trump's own ongoing trade war. Meantime, Trump has been calling Powell names once again and seemingly forgot he was the one who appointed him in the first place.
He's a terrible Fed chair. I was surprised he was appointed. I was surprised, frankly, that Biden put him in and extended him. But they did. As president, there are a few decisions more important than nominating leaders of integrity and good judgment to hold trusted positions in public office. And few of those trusted positions are more important than the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Accordingly, it is my pleasure and my honor to announce my nomination of Jerome Powell.
Natasha Sarin is still with us. So, Natasha, Trump's apparent memory lapse aside about the fact that he appointed Jay Powell to this job, what would be the significance of Trump firing Jay Powell?
Well, I think there's a reason you've heard everyone from Jamie Dimon to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to members of the Trump administration be very explicit that it is incredibly important to respect the independence of the Federal Reserve and kind of critical for our nation's functionings to do just that. The Federal Reserve worries about two things and two things only. It cares about inflation and it cares about employment. In a world in which it looks like it is being responsive to political pressures that have nothing to do with inflation or employment, kind of the magic sauce of the Federal Reserve will break. It will be the case that it's not like there's a button that the Fed or Jay Powell gets to push that is like mortgage rates should be lower. The reality is they altogether, 12 of them on the Open Markets Committee, come and decide upon what one particular interest rate in the economy is going to be. The rest of the committee wouldn't go along with someone who was appointed and making politicized decisions with respect to the interest rate trajectory. But even if they did, that would mean that that particular rate would no longer have an impact in the meaningful impact on what mortgage rates were in this country. It would mean that inflation would be higher in this country. And we know that because we've done this before. Nixon politicized the Fed, and we saw inflation go up from 3% to 13% in 2 years.
And we've also seen other countries politicize their own central banks and have had terrible inflationary results, right?
Turkey got 85% over the course of a very short period as a result of exactly doing just this, trying to pressure their version of the Federal Reserve, their central bank, to adjust interest rates in a way that would be politically expedient. There's a reason you do short-term politicization in a way that is distinct from long-term planning, like a central bank is meant to do. That type of stability is something that is incredibly, crucially important, and again, something that could break very, very quickly.
So does Trump simply not understand how this works, or is it that he is willing to trade our long-term future for some short-term win?
You know, who are we to try to get in the minds of what exactly is sort of the thought process there?
Well, what does he want, actually? I mean, why does he want to fire Powell? What is the decision that Powell, maybe another way of asking, but like, what is the decision that Powell is making that Donald Trump is so fundamentally pissed off about that he's like, I want this guy fired because nothing else makes sense but firing him?
You know, what I don't quite understand is it sounds like what the president wants and what the administration wants is to see lower interest rates in the economy. And you kind of get that if you look at mortgage rates or you look at car loan rates. They're higher today than they have been in recent history. But what's wild is that the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, has kind of signaled to the administration very explicitly that in the absence of this tariff uncertainty and these trade policies, the Federal Reserve would have already cut. So they have telegraphed exactly, if you want to see lower interest rates, then stop pursuing the most inflationary policies that we've seen in our lifetimes with respect to this trade war. But for some reason, that doesn't appear to be what the administration is interested in. And instead, they're interested in potentially breaking the independence of the Federal Reserve in ways that are quite hard to walk back
Let me,
from.
if I can, just play for you what Elizabeth Warren, not exactly a fan of Jerome Powell, what she had to say on CNBC when she was asked about Jerome Powell being possibly fired. Watch.
If, in fact, Jay Powell were to be fired, pushed out, or otherwise dismissed, what you think would genuinely happen to the bond market, the dollar, the equity markets?
I think they crash. The independence itself is a value. It's a value to the United States. It's a value to our markets. If Donald Trump destroys that, then he brings down those markets. He burns something of value to the United States.
Do you agree with that? And what would the consequences of that be to ordinary Americans?
So I very much agree. And in fact, you saw it start to happen this week, right? When rumors got out that there was a letter that had been floated potentially firing Chair Powell, what you saw is that the stock market started to crater as a result. And it only stopped cratering when the president was very explicit that actually that wasn't something that they were considering. The reality for ordinary Americans is that our sort of the independence of our central bank and the fact that we have this capacity to manage inflation and employment in a way that is absent political considerations is exactly what has allowed us to have low borrowing rates for households. It's exactly what's allowed us to have, until recent history, decades of low inflation. It's because there's so much trust and credibility in this institution. It's exactly the reason why other countries are willing to lend money to us at very low rates. It's because we're a safe bet. And not just in this area, but in so much of what this administration is doing. And frankly, even if the administration doesn't fire Chair Powell or try to fire Chair Powell, by the way, the Supreme Court has been explicit they can't fire Chair Powell. But even if they don't try to, but instead next May they appoint someone else who's going to make decisions in a way that feels political or the market feels is political, that kind of runs those exact same risks.
All right, Natasha Serene, it's great to see you as always. Thank you for helping make sense of it all for us.